I'm Michael Rooks, Wieland Family Senior Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art at the Heim Museum.
And I'm Giddis, Macia, a Curatorial Research Associate. And we're standing here in Chong Hak, painter of Seoraksan, a Korean painter born in 1937, and we'll take you through the seasons of his life through 4 decades of his work. So in Kim's early 40s, in 1977, he moves to New York, and he's there from 77 to 79 before coming back to Korea. And so it's a really interesting time of growth for him.
Absolutely. And in New York, we'll see that he was introduced to a whole new range of influences that had to do with neo-expressionism, figurative painting, landscape painting. We selected this drawing because it really speaks to his time in New York when he split from the dominant discourse in Korean contemporary art.
The most interesting thing about this work and why we chose to include it in this gallery is because it's so similar to the mountainscapes that we're standing around. And at first it was going to go in the early works gallery with another one of his New York watercolors. And instead it really belonged here. And as we've talked, I think he was missing the mountains while he was in New York in the late 1970s.
Right, it seems that way. I mean, this is a skyscraper scene from New York. It's a Manhattan city scene. But from a distance, even from up close, it looks like 2 overlapping slopes of mountain or hills. And in fact, when he moved back to Korea a couple of years later, he made several of these paintings, but rather than skyscrapers, they were replaced by trees. Almost identical paintings.
So we're standing here in fall, and it was really easy for us to choose to organize the show by the 4 seasons. And some of that is that Kim based a lot of his work around the seasons, the transitions of the wilderness around him, but also he really appreciates the cyclical nature of the seasons, both as a person and spiritually, but also as a painter.
Also, the 4 seasons is a traditional East Asian subject, which is important for our exhibition because almost in every work there is embedded in it some reference or aspect of tradition that Kim Chong Hak is thinking about or recovering in the work. And so what we see here is a painting that starts in the summertime on the left and carries through to the fall. So from our traditions, we read this as a vanitas painting or a memento mori, something that reminds one of the end.
Yeah.
But for this artist, it's really a reminder of the beginning of a new life.
And so many of the other works in this gallery are really colorful, bold, larger than life. But this one is really special because he painted it for the exhibition in 2023. It's such a physical painting too. And I think just watching his practice and watching some of his techniques, I think I see some of the fingerprints as well as brush strokes. And so you can really see a lot of his energy in this work.
And the one compositional element that's interesting are these vines that stretch across the canvas, which correspond to his idea of spirit vitality, which is the first Chinese principles of painting. It's called Xiyun Shendong. So the spirit vitality is something that he describes in terms of a stretched rubber band, the tautness of a rubber band, and you can see it vibrating. And literally here he takes that analogy and interprets it as these squash blossom vines that are stretched across the entire painting to convey this kind of spirit of nature. So the winter season among traditional East Asian painters was a very important season because it allowed them to see and convey the underlying structure of the mountains and the landscape without all the foliage and flowers. And so you can really get a sense of the austerity of these places. Wintertime includes images of mountains, maybe the only images of mountains in the exhibition apart from the drawing section. And we're here in front of a painting that is not of a mountain scene, but rather in the forest interior.
You're fully immersed in the mountain here. And this work is beloved already because it's a promised gift of the artist and one that we had a really fun time picking out while we were in Korea. We were in the storage unit with Mr. Kim's daughter, Helen, And she had laid out a selection of paintings, knew that winter was really one that we were interested in because it's kind of overlooked. And we had a really nice time looking at some of those works, kind of thinking about our collection, analyzing the selection, and ended up with this one.
We selected this painting because it is a late painting, and it's an example of all-over painting, a style that he picked up while he was in New York. And what we mean by that, of course, all-over painting is painting on the entire rectangle, the entire surface of the painting from edge to edge without any indication of pictorial space, like a horizon line or what have you. So it oscillates between flatness and dimensionality. I mean, even these poplar branches, I'm not sure what the tree is, but they zip across the entire surface of the canvas with these parallel lines painted to suggest the bark or the surface of the trunks. But on another level, they just re-amplify the flatness of the painting. So they act both as images of trees in space, but then also remind us of the kind of abstraction that he was involved with.
And you mentioned the white earlier, and that really ties in with the self-portrait that we've chosen to include in the Winter Gallery. And that self-portrait was really important to us during our trip to Korea and a few others, which we included in the exhibition, because we visited Gallery Hyundai's People Are Flowers exhibition of solely Kim's portraiture.
That show at Hyundai Gallery was one of the first, if not the first, exhibition of his portraits. And we wanted to include his self-portrait here just to introduce him to the audience, but also to show the relationship between how he thinks of form of the body, the shoulders, the slope of the shoulders, and the mass of the head, the volume of the head, like he thinks about the form and volume and shape of mountains. When we selected works for the seasons, particularly summer, we were thinking about philosophical traditions that the artist was engaged with, interested in. And in summertime, there's a sense of stillness that relates to a philosophical idea called wu wei, which means essentially kind of an active stillness, that there's something going on even though there's nothing going on.
So this is River, and it's painted on an 8-panel folding screen. He used thinned acrylic and painted directly on hanji paper, which is mulberry paper. And so for him to kind of engage with the East Asian tradition of folding screens by painting on this one, but actually flat instead of intended to be bent and folded. I love that you can see the lines and the divisions of each panel, but it's a flat painting.
Typically, folding screens are about time, the progression of time and your relationship with that experience of seeing the painting literally unfold in front of you. And in this case, a painting it's presented all at once, but there's still an element of time. And
he's connecting here with a period that he's the most influenced by in Korean history, which is the Chosun dynasty. Lasted from the late 1390s to 1910. At the start of Japanese colonization. And the Joseon dynasty was known as the Korean Renaissance. It was a time when the royal court supported the arts and culture, and there was so much cultural production. And so there are so many things that have inspired Kim's paintings, but also his collecting practice that we'll see later.
And landscape painting in the Joseon dynasty, there were so many innovations in landscape painting, especially in the 18th century, which is when Gamjae was alive and active, otherwise known as Jeonsung, and other artists like Kim Hong-do. And one of the innovations was the use of diagonals to get you into the painting and to traverse the painting, the landscape, the mountain, to actually feel as though you're wandering through this landscape. Here, the diagonal suggests this very dramatic flow of water in a stream.
I feel like it's rushing at me from this angle. But we saw that in a lot of the Chosun works by Gamjae in Korea. Visiting a lot of the museum collections, we were able to see some of his works. And you can see that diagonal. And Kim really uses that here, but in his synthesis of Chosun and Western abstraction and his own fusion of that and the bright color. And he does it so well. So we finally made it to spring, which is probably the most famous season for Kim. He loves to take inspiration from the surrounding environment, but also the folk art that's in his collection. Here, he's blown it up at a really large scale. He really feels this connection to flowers and kind of creatures kind of moving within those flowers, and we see so many of those in this work, and it shows a lot of his love for nature. But as you mentioned in the catalog as well, it's kind of terrifying. I mean, they're larger than life, they're coming at you.
Right, and they don't have the soft edges that you would see on a floral still life, you know, from
Right.
the French 19th century painter, for example.
I think he's showing beauty and terror. It's kind of the sublime. It's that same experience of being in awe of all of the beauty and the color and the animals. They themselves are their own kind of mystery.
And it's also not from observation necessarily, but if you are familiar with these flowers in any of these paintings, you know that none of them are blossoming at the same time during the year. So
Right.
it's a complete construction. It's
So
a
idealized.
fabrication, right, it's idealized.
We were so excited to include folk art. One, because we already have such a strength in folk and self-taught art at the High, and our audiences are familiar with quilt making, and so we were able to include a lot of embroideries in the exhibition from Kim's collection, and most of them are from Joseon Dynasty, which we mentioned earlier, but they're blown up here. And it was so great to include the embroideries in the exhibition because Kim, trying to find this Korean identity, this Koreanness, pulls from the work of women just within the community. And in a time of kind of the big macho art world, that was really interesting, really revolutionary.
And brave for an
Yeah.
artist of his generation to uplift the traditions of women makers. The identities of these people are no longer known, but uplifting those traditions and bringing it out from the cabinets and households to celebrate it in this way was a very brave thing to do.
Something I have to mention is the fact that he cut individual pieces of canvas and typically painted them on the floor.
Right.
Using some of those, acrylic buckets and brooms and paintbrushes, but also his hands. And you can see a lot of his handwork in the painting too. But they're so massive, and it was important for us to display it on this angle. Both of us were really wanting that immersive experience for someone to stand in that corner and get the full view of the painting, but you had seen it displayed in other ways before.
I'd seen it on the floor. It was
Yeah.
unrolled for me in the studio on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
And he painted it on the floor, not only because it's huge, but because it's also a way of making ink wash painting. It's the traditional process of making calligraphy or larger ink wash paintings is horizontally on a table or floor. And so, like the painting River, which is a synthesis of East and West, this is as well, and you can almost think of it like a folding screen, which is why we wanted to install it with this panel kind of jutting out, so you can experience the painting over time, and it can envelop you, and it can give a sense of the painting sort of literally unfolding in a way for the viewer over the course of the 4 panels.